Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking the literal hidden machinery inside your head, the fascinating neuroscience behind why you do what you do every single day. We're going to look directly at the research on how our brains form routines, how they tightly hold onto them, and most importantly, how we can completely rewrite them.
So think about everything you did today. A paper published by a Duke University researcher found that a staggering 40% of those actions weren't actually conscious decisions. Nope, they were completely automated habits. From the way you tied your shoes this morning, the exact route you drove to work, to the words you said to your family as you walked out the door, nearly half of your daily existence is just running on pure autopilot. But how exactly does that happen? And, how can we hijack that autopilot for ourselves?
Well, to answer that, let's jump right into Section 1, the habit cure. I want to tell you about Lisa Allen. She was a 34-year-old who started smoking and drinking at 16, struggled with obesity, and was basically being hounded by collection agencies over $10,000 in debt. But her transformation into a lean, vibrant, debt-free marathon runner, it didn't start with some massive, overwhelming overhaul of her entire life. It started with a single desperate moment in Cairo, Egypt. She was going through this terrible divorce, feeling utterly hopeless, and she couldn't even manage to properly light a cigarette in her hotel room. In that literal rock-bottom moment, she set a bizarre goal. She decided she was going to return to Egypt and trek through the desert. But to do that, she had to do just one thing first: quit smoking. And that single, seemingly isolated shift touched off a massive domino effect. Replacing smoking with jogging completely changed how she ate, how she slept, how she saved money, and eventually it led to her buying a home and running marathons.
This brilliantly illustrates what researchers call a keystone habit. Basically, a keystone habit is a central pattern that when you alter it, organically rewrites the rest of your daily behaviors. Lisa didn't focus on her debt, her diet, and her career all at the same time. She just focused on the keystone, the smoking. And by proving to herself that she could master that one routine, that sense of behavioral control literally spread to every other corner of her brain. Moving right along, let's look at Section 2, the memory mystery. To truly understand the biological machinery making these habits possible, we have to look at a medical anomaly, a 71-year-old man known in the literature as Eugene Pauly. Back in 1992, a really dangerous virus completely destroyed the part of Eugene's brain responsible for short-term memory. Now, his intellect remained totally sharp, and he vividly remembered his life prior to 1960, but he literally could not retain any new information for more than a minute. You could introduce yourself to him, leave the room, walk right back in 60 seconds later, and he would have absolutely no idea who you were. He didn't even know which room in his own house was the kitchen.
So here is the wild part. The crucial question is, if Eugene couldn't even draw a basic map of his own living room, how on earth did his wife find him one day wandering the neighborhood, collecting pine cones, having found his way back home entirely alone? I mean, he had no conscious memory of leaving the house, no memory of where he'd walked, yet he navigated the streets and returned safely. Doctors were absolutely baffled. Where was this navigational information living in his damaged brain?
To solve this mystery, we turn to Section 3, inside the basal ganglia.
Over at the Brain and Cognitive Sciences Department at MIT, researchers peered inside the neurological spiderwebs of the mind and discovered something that changes everything we know about decision-making. It turns out, our habits do not live in the complex, conscious outer layers of the brain where we make deliberate choices. Nope, they reside in the basal ganglia. This is a primitive, ancient, golf ball-sized lump of tissue nestled deep near your brainstem. And this structure is entirely responsible for storing our automatic routines. That is the very reason Eugene Pauly could find his way home. His conscious memory was destroyed, but his basal ganglia was perfectly intact, just quietly running his walking habits in the background.
To see how this actually works in real time, those MIT researchers used a T-shaped maze. They implanted tiny sensors into the skulls of rats to monitor their basal ganglia and then place them in the maze. The sequence was super simple. A loud click would sound, a partition would open, and the rat would wander through the maze to find a piece of chocolate at the end. At first, the rats just wandered randomly. They sniffed corners, scratched walls, just trying to make sense of this brand new environment.
But when comparing the neurological data over time, the researchers noticed an incredible paradox. During that first encounter, the rat's brain was exploding with activity, right? It was working at full power to analyze every single new smell and sight. But after a week of running that exact same route, the mental activity actually decreased to the point where the cognitive centers of the brain were practically sleeping. As the rat learned the maze and ran it faster, it literally stopped thinking. The basal ganglia had completely taken over. And this happens because of a highly efficient neurological process called chunking. See, the brain is constantly looking for ways to save effort, so it converts a sequence of complex actions into one effortless, automatic routine. Think about when you first learned to back a car out of a driveway. It required immense concentration. You were checking mirrors, watching the pedal. Now, you do it while adjusting the radio and talking to your kids. Your brain has chunked the behavior, storing it deep in the basal ganglia, so your conscious mind is freed up to focus on other things.
Okay, zooming out a bit, we get to Section 4, the habits of crowds.
What is truly mind-blowing is what happens when we scale this biology up from a single brain. Habits don't just govern individuals, they govern entire societies and organizations. Take this real-world example from Kufa, Iraq. An army major stationed there had been analyzing videotapes of recent local riots, and he realized that the violence wasn't spontaneous at all. Just like a rat in a maze, the crowd was following a highly predictable step-by-step habit loop. First, a crowd would gather in a plaza. Then, spectators and kebab vendors would show up. By dusk, the crowd would start getting hungry and restless, someone would throw a rock, and suddenly, boom, a full-scale riot would erupt. The major recognized this exact sequence as a behavioral chunk.
So, what did he do? He didn't call in more troops or heavy weapons. He just went to the local mayor with a really simple request. Keep the kebab vendors out of the plazas. When the next protest gathered, the exact same cues were in place, but at dusk, when the crowd got hungry, there was no food. So the spectators left. The chanters became dispirited. By 8 p.m., the entire plaza was completely empty. By simply removing the kebab stands, disrupting just one tiny piece of the environmental cue, they completely broke the riot habit loop without firing a single shot. Which brings us to our final takeaway, Section 5, rebuilding your patterns.
Whether it's a person rebuilding their physical health, a rat finding chocolate, or an entire city finding peace, the underlying science remains exactly the same. Understanding this hidden machinery, the cue, the routine, and the basal ganglia, gives you the absolute power to change it. As the great philosopher and psychologist William James noted way back in 1892, all our life, so far as it has definite form, is but a mass of habits. He recognized this over a century ago, and now we literally have the brain scans to prove it. The vast majority of our daily existence isn't a series of calculated, rational choices. It's just an accumulation of these subconscious chunks of behavior. But once you can identify them, you can mold them.
So knowing that your basal ganglia is sitting there right now, just waiting for a new routine to chunk and automate, what is the one keystone pattern you are going to take control of today? Remember, it only takes changing one habit to start a chain reaction that transforms everything else. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to look at your own daily routines through this new lens. See you next time.